So there's a bunch of videos lately about people talking about why they left the UK, and I figured I'd make my own share my own experience having left to Japan about 7, 8 months ago. So for those of you who are new here, my name is Ray, and I graduated from Cambridge about 2.5 years ago with a degree in physics. During that time, I made a few vlogs about my undergraduate experience, so you can check those out on this channel. But basically in this video, I want to talk about my decisions for leaving and something for you to reflect upon yourself if you're living in the UK, and especially if you're young and ambitious as well. So of course, remember, this is my own opinion. You're welcome to disagree with it as well, and you can make your own video about why I'm staying in the UK instead. So I'm going to start off with traveling. When I graduated, I worked in the UK for about 6 months. I grew up in the UK from about the age of 2, and I went to university there. So I grew up in and around Manchester from the age of 2 to like 18, and then from 18 to 21, I stayed in the around Cambridge because I was undergraduate there. And after graduating at age of 21, I worked in Oxford for about 6 months as like a software engineer. And then afterwards, I left that job and I decided to travel around and like do freelance work. And I did some startup accelerators and I did my own business and various other things. So during that time, I got to visit like 25 different countries. And I think during that time, like my expectations of like how good your life can be or how good the place you live in can be has like massively increased. So basically, like there are a couple of factors here of where you should live when you're young. I think firstly, like being around young and ambitious people. I think the reality is, especially in the UK, there aren't a lot of young and ambitious like people because of this phenomenon called tall poppy syndrome, where people in the UK generally seem to like put each other down. So if you say that you have like high dreams or like high hopes or whatever, then people are kind of like, oh man, like of course, like as if you're going to achieve that, or they like give a very snarky or sarcastic response. And of course that is like maybe British humor, maybe they're kind of joking, but it kind of like reinforces itself into you over time with enough people saying this. Like if in the UK, if you're in a pretty average town and you're like, man, I'm going to become like the next prime minister or whatever, then people will be like, yeah, as if, or like, oh, why would you want to join those guys? If you say, I'm going to start like $1 billion company in the future and like solve all the world's problems or something, people kind of like down upon you for wanting to like break free or like stand out of the crowd. Whereas I've noticed in the US, especially like if you say as a young kid in middle school in the US, hey, I'm going to become like the next president of the United States, the attitude is more like, oh, you can do like anything if you put your mind to it. Or if you're in San Francisco, which is especially known for like tech startups, and you're like, man, we're going to start like the next Google or like the next $1 billion company, like people actually encourage you and they like motivate you and they say like, oh, I'll connect you to this guy, I'll connect you to that guy, and they seem more supporting of your beliefs and dreams. I especially noticed this during a startup accelerator that I did called Y Combinator, where people seem much more optimistic about the future and more willing to build it, and they have more agency and they take more control over their life. Whereas it seems that people in the UK, they kind of like just kind of let things happen to them and they kind of like put other people down, especially if you're not from a big city. And yeah, it just is not a good feeling overall if you're a young and ambitious person and you want to like achieve big things in your life. I think another component of this is because I was pretty entrepreneurial growing up. I wanted to do entrepreneurial stuff, and there aren't a lot of entrepreneurial people in the UK. And it's usually because they move to the US, especially for those who raise funding, because it's easier to raise like venture capital funding in the US. So when I was in San Francisco, there were like significantly more like people just doing cool stuff. I'd meet people who in like high school or like college, they like modded their car so they could like drive their car with an Xbox controller or something. And you just don't find people doing cool stuff like that in the UK, in my experience, especially top universities where people take like a more conservative approach of they just want to go to like get a pretty basic job or like go to like consulting or investment banking and just kind of live out their days being like an office slave, I guess, like quote unquote. I think another component of this, why I left, apart from the culture, is taxes. After traveling to a bunch of different countries, I noticed the taxes were lower at like a given income level and the quality of life was higher as well. So for example, like taxes between Japan and the UK, when you include like resident tax and like government tax, is pretty similar. But if you've ever been to Japan, you kind of notice like, hey, the quality of life here is like way higher than in the UK. And if you're like, I don't know, you have like a cost optimizing mindset and you're considering, okay, where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Like, where am I going to get the most bang for my buck for my taxes? Is like an equivalent thing. I think in the UK, a lot of rich people do live there, although they are kind of leaving these days. I saw a graph where it's like 10,000 people, 10,000 millionaires have left the UK, and it's the second most number of people who left the UK after China, which has like 20 times bigger population as well. Whilst there are a lot of rich people in the UK, it's usually that they made their money overseas where taxes were lower, and then they came back to the UK. For example, I see online that a bunch of people, like, they live in Dubai, where they have to pay zero tax or like very low tax for their companies as well. And they have no intention of living in Dubai for like the long term. Like when they start a family or they get married, they want to move back to the UK or go to a different country to raise their kids, because raising kids is like not an optimal environment in Dubai, according to them. So a lot of the rich people that you do see in the UK, they usually made their money overseas where the taxes are lower. And then they came back to the UK to like raise their family and like invest in property and do various other things instead. I rarely see people actually making a lot of money in their 20s in the UK. So also when it comes to taxes as well, inflation has massively increased in the UK in recent years, but the tax brackets haven't increased in line with inflation. So in a sense, your purchasing power after taxes is lower than it was about 5 years ago. And in some countries, that's just not the case as well. When it comes to like eating out and stuff, I noticed, like, for example, in Japan, an average Japanese person making an average Japanese salary can go and eat out more often with their friends and stuff than an average person in the UK on an average UK salary. And it's just a way like the economy works and the system is designed. And I personally prefer that because, of course, like, I don't cook, being able to eat out whenever I want to, and the transport just being like much better on time. Like in the UK, there are train strikes. When I want to visit a friend in a different city, I gotta like make sure, hey, is there gonna be a train strike tomorrow? Is there not gonna be one? Whereas in Japan, at least, or many other countries as well, they don't really do train strikes. Like, it's just not really a thing that happens. And I think like when you live in another country, at least for a decent chunk of time, maybe 2 weeks or more, you notice all these like small day-to-day conveniences or day-to-day improvements in your daily life that could happen from like leaving. I think another pretty big thing for me was like during the winter months in the UK, I noticed myself like feeling pretty lethargic and like sad, because like it was always dark. It was very dark, gloomy, and rainy. And I noticed myself feeling more productive when it's like generally sunnier and shinier and like brighter side. The UK summer is great, but for like 8 months of the year, 9 months of the year, it's like not really that good. Whereas in other countries, the weather is just like better year round. And especially if you're like me and you feel more productive when the weather is better, I think that makes like a pretty big quality of life difference. I think another big thing for me now being like 24, graduating like 2.5 years ago, when I went back home after graduating, it kind of felt like my life went backwards in a way. In the sense that, oh, now I've graduated, like I'm at home with my parents again. And I'm in the same childhood bedroom that I grew up in. And it's easy to fall back into old habits of like, oh man, I'm just gonna like watch movies, I'm gonna like chill and hang out with my parents and like siblings and stuff, and like go to a park and whatever, which is like all great and all. But after a while, it kind of like, it feels like you're no longer the ambitious young person you used to be. I think one part about being away from home kind of feels like you're on a big adventure and you're like trying to make something of yourself, and you're like gonna go home and like show that you've, I don't know, quote unquote, made it. During university, when I lived in university dorms, it was kind of like that. Every day kind of felt like an adventure. But when I went back home during the holidays, during university, after about a week or two, I fell back into old habits, just because it's the same environment that I grew up in with old habits. Now, many people in the UK, they do end up moving to other cities, for example, like London. A lot of my friends moved to London. But I feel like, especially for university graduates, London, the salaries are not as high as the US, especially for similar or same job. For example, a software engineer in London probably makes like £50,000, £40,000, whereas in the US, they'd be making like $150,000, $200,000 in like San Francisco, even more depending on how experienced they are. And for a given like income level, their take-home pay after all the expenses and health insurance and everything else is still higher than someone who is working in the same job in the UK. I think that UK salaries just haven't really increased since the 2008 financial crisis, and it doesn't look like they're going to increasing much time soon. Probably why a lot of millionaires are leaving and they're taking their businesses with them as well. But going back to living in London, A lot of my friends after graduating from Cambridge, they went to live in London and work in like investment banking consulting jobs, which are like pretty high salary compared to the average in the UK. And almost all of them, they don't live alone. Not because they don't want to live alone, it's because they can't afford to live alone. I feel like cities in the UK, or especially in London, the city is designed to extract as much money out of you as it physically can. In terms of like, after eating out, like renting, all your bills, utilities, and everything else, my friends who still have pretty high incomes, they're left with like 200, £100 of savings every month. And that's with them living with flatmates and roommates as well. Whereas in other countries, you can feel like people actually live alone in like a nice place on the same level of income, or like the average income for that city or town. And I feel like for someone who especially enjoyed living alone, that was like a pretty big difference, especially if I lived in London. I know I'd be paying like 3-4 times more for a place in London, which is in a worse off location. And I'd probably have to have roommates as well that I don't really like so much. I don't have much choice over as well. So to summarize up until now, I feel like the culture when it comes to UK, especially if you're young and ambitious, is not really like forgiving. I notice people have like tall poppy syndrome, where they kind of like cut other people down, or they kind of like make people feel bad about themselves for being too ambitious. The second point is taxes are too high, and it feels like you're not really getting bang for your buck for what you're paying. A lot of people who do make a lot of money in their 20s, they usually do it in a low tax place, and then they come back to UK in their 30s or 40s because it's a better place to raise kids than, say, Dubai, for example. At least for now, maybe. And thirdly, it just comes down to the quality of lifestyle you want to live. Like, if you enjoy living alone, it's going to be harder to do that in the UK. If you enjoy eating out, it's going to be harder to do that in the UK on an average income compared to some other countries. If you enjoy like a nicer climate and feel more productive when the climate is nicer, it's harder to do that in the UK. And of course, I know not everyone can leave, and not everyone is young and ambitious and they want to like achieve big things. It just comes down to the kind of person you are and like your kind of family circumstances. For example, if you're an only child and you have like caring responsibilities, it might be like pretty hard for you to leave. And finally, I feel like I want the sense of feeling like I'm moving forwards and being on an adventure. When I go back home, because it's too expensive to live in London, I just kind of feel like my life has gone backwards, or I'm not really improving or like pursuing big goals anymore. I know friends who have, like from high school, for example, secondary school, they live at home, they went to university while staying at home, and they haven't achieved many like great things. And of course they don't have to. But I feel like the home environment, especially after graduating, just you kind of like take a step back and you no longer are like the young ambitious person that you once were. And bear in mind, this is not just me. There are a lot of people on YouTube who are making videos about this. Like anecdotally, many of my friends who graduated from medicine and are now doctors working in the NHS are just saying the NHS, they don't want to work long hours for low pay and like a stressed out environment in a system that's kind of broken. And many of them are like planning on going to Australia or Canada or the US, where the salaries for doctors are much higher, they have more of a work-life balance, and they're more well respected. So ultimately, it just comes down to the lifestyle that you want to live. I feel like if you get to travel, have the opportunity to travel and visit a few different countries, you realize how much different it can be. And then it just comes down to your goals as well, of what kind of people you want to be around. Like if you're in San Francisco, you're going to be around more techie people who are doing startups and companies and are trying to like make it really big. If you're in Boston in the US, you're going to be around more biomedical companies or like consulting companies. If you want to make it in acting, it's probably better to be in Hollywood or like somewhere else that's kind of known for acting. I feel like one big difference between the UK and the US is that in the UK, London is basically the city for everything. In the US, different cities are kind of known for different things. For example, San Francisco and the Bay Area are like tech focused. Hollywood and LA is like more like acting focused or like content creators and people there. Boston is more consulting and biomedical focused. New York is kind of more finance focused if you want to do finance. And whereas in the UK and many other countries as well, basically the capital city is only known for everything. And if you're interested in my logistics for leaving, is especially for a student, I would encourage you to go to the best university you can, because a lot of countries with declining fertility rates and like increasing global competitivity, they want to attract the best possible talent to their country. So Hong Kong, like Australia, Japan, Singapore, South Korea as well, Canada, and like the UK as well introduced a bunch of new visas. I think other countries are introducing new visas as well, where they call like talent visas. So basically, if you have like recognizable achievements or you graduated from a top university recently or something, then it's pretty easy to get a visa for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years or something, because they want you to move to that country and they want you to build a career and life in that country as well. So if you're a student right now and you haven't gone to university yet, I would encourage you to try and get into the best university you can do, because it opens your doors to other countries you can go to in the future. For example, it's much harder to get a visa to go to Japan if you haven't been to university. And if you've been to, like, I think it's a top 100 university or so, then it's phenomenally easy to get a visa. And I think another big problem in the UK is this complaining attitude, which kind of leads to the, I'm not going to do anything about it. So, for example, like whenever you have a normal day-to-day conversation with someone, they're complaining about how their favorite football team is lost, or how like the weather's really bad. And of course, those things they can't necessarily do something about. But it's like this generally pessimistic mindset that bleeds into the rest of their life, where they end up complaining about things that they do have control over, and then they don't do anything about it. And when you're surrounded by people who are complaining and don't do anything about it, you kind of fall into the same trap. I think when I met people in the US, especially in like high agency areas such as San Francisco, when someone complains about something, it's like their friends are like, okay, like let's figure out a solution to this problem, let's like get this underway. And probably that's why businesses end up doing better over there. Whereas in the UK, it's just kind of like, oh, I'm going to complain about this thing and then do nothing about it, or do nothing about myself. So I am complaining about the UK, but fundamentally, I don't think I can personally change the culture in the UK. But I can do something that will change my own life and improve my own life, which is by going to another country, whose culture that I do prefer and like, and hang around with people that I do prefer and like as well. But yeah, that's basically for this video. Like, this is all my opinion. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but I would encourage you, if you're young, especially travel to different countries. And I think if you haven't been to another country, it's really hard to judge how much better life can be elsewhere maybe. And if you have been to other countries and you still think the UK is better, then like you can be more confident that your decision is probably the right one. But if you've never been to another country and you're only planning on staying in the UK, then I feel like you can be less confident that your decision of staying is the correct decision. Anyways, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and follow me on Instagram and like all that shebang, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.